Hello, and welcome to another fun-filled ForgeTalks episode. And yes, this week is particularly fun-filled. I'm joined today by kind of ForgeRock royalty, someone who's been with the company since day one, none other than ForgeRock's chief evangelist, Allan Foster. Hello, Allan.
Hello, Fraser. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be joined by you today, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
I think it should be fun.
It should. So we're talking today, Allan, about the current coronavirus pandemic and how the entire world has had to shift basically to remote ways of living, you know, remote working, remote banking, remote hospitals, all this stuff. And in our space, the topic of digital transformation has been prevalent for years, right? But the current pandemic seems to have made digital transformation more relevant than ever. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the reality about it is that this is kind of like we've been sitting around for the last 10 years telling people to prepare for the aliens. The aliens are coming. The aliens are coming. And sort of around about February or March of this year, the aliens came. And, you know, we really have had to fundamentally shift how everything works. I know every single one of us watching this has a story to tell. You know me, I have been, you know, on every continent pretty much every month and enjoy traveling around the world and meeting with our customers. And for the last 6 months, I haven't been further than about 50 miles from my front door.
Yeah.
It's been a very tumultuous time. And as a result, that has a fundamental shift as to how people interact in public, right? We've been seeing these videos of people getting upset about wearing masks. We've been, you know, people are scared and people don't know how to handle this. But from a business perspective, we have to keep on going. And so, yeah, we have to deal with new ways of doing business, new ways of interacting with our customers, new ways of interacting with our employees, and this whole process of how do we deal with, if you sort of excuse the whole thing, how do we deal with the fact that the aliens have come?
Yeah.
This is what we've been preparing for you know, the entire discussion that we've had around digital transformation.
Sure.
And if we take that term digital transformation and just break it down a little bit, the thing that COVID has really done for us is it has meant that our physical interactions have had to be minimized. And the only choice we have, since we haven't yet worked out how to do telepathy, the only real choice that we have is a digital interaction, right?
Yeah.
And so a digital transformation is all about how are you working in this digital space? And absolutely, this has been the thing we've been waiting for, and this has really shown as we look at people around, companies around the world, businesses around the world, those that have really embraced digital have actually managed to work reasonably well. Sure, it's tumultuous for everybody, but they've done better than others. And those that have not embraced digital have really felt the pain.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to ask you, is that, like, I think everyone has an experience of companies that seem to have pivoted really well and some companies that maybe haven't pivoted as well. Obviously, in some circumstances, there's no amount of digital transformation could have protected you. But what role do you think digital transformation has played, for the most part, in companies that have been able to pivot to the current climate?
I think that it has basically made them ready to deal with this change of how we interact with customers and employees, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one story that I can tell is that my sister runs a small medical clinic across the river here in Portland. And they've got 7 or 8 staff, and they do primarily physical and occupational therapy, right? So when you think about it, this is a business that is, you can't get much more physical than physical therapy, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's where it is. However, she had taken on the approach about a year ago. She started looking at how does she digitally enable her customers and her employees. And so they went through the process of digital identities, connecting digitally, etc. And when the pandemic actually broke out, what she was in the position of able to do, out of all of the clinics in Portland, her clinic was actually growing. She was hiring new therapists. And
Wow.
they were able to do Zoom-based consulting. They were able to do email-based therapies
Yeah.
because they had set it up, right? Their customers, their patients, and the clinicians were comfortable working this way. Now, has it been tumultuous for them? Absolutely, it has. This is a whole new way of doing business.
Yeah.
However, she was able to continue the relationships with insurance companies. She could still get paid. They could still do visits. They were able to adopt a digital delivery, and that's a very small little example. But I think it's the canary in the coal mine, right? When you start looking at all of the big businesses, we can easily point our fingers at Amazon. But what about these small little clinics? What about the restaurants that have been pivoting over to having to do takeout and things like that? Absolutely, that is part of embracing that whole digital transformation.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point. It's just about the companies that have prepared were just so much more flexible to be able to react and pivot, right? And you make a good point there. And it's not just about reaching customers, though, right? And for a lot of businesses, they're actually struggling just to even connect with their employees throughout all of this. Why do you think this is?
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about it, businesses basically end up being communities, right? And communities, as people, we tend to function in groups. And so we rely a lot on the physical connection. We rely a lot on being able to, hang out with each other in the conference room and see each other's reactions and work together. And so for many businesses, the physical place is actually quite important for the business.
Sure.
And then we can sort of look, there's some businesses, ForgeRock is a prime example of this, where we have a relatively small business. We've got employees in the hundreds, but we have offices around the world in the tens, and so we're used to dealing with each other digitally. We're used to dealing with email, with Zoom, with all of these different kinds of things. We're used to dealing across time zones. And so for many of the folks in ForgeRock, although it has been interesting for us to work at home and have the kids running in and out of our office, etc., we've been able to adapt to those needs pretty easily.
Yeah.
But let's go back and look at the enterprise where you have to use a company-issued laptop on the company-issued desktop, on the company-issued network, with the company-issued chair. I mean, you have this very controlled structure. And a few years ago, one of the buzzwords we all used to use was, bring your own device. And what that was really going down the path was saying that you have to let go of control. And so the businesses that have tried to maintain that very tight control, and you've got to work on a business computer at work, etc., suddenly discover themselves with no way to empower their employees to be able to do work from home or wherever. And then you have the problem where they've been relying on the security at the front desk to identify the employees. And now they have to deal with employees coming in over, I hate to say dial-up, I guess that's showing my age. But,
Nice.
but they're coming in over VPN access. And how do you identify that an employee hasn't been compromised with a spoof email? And setting in like that. And so the issue of fundamentally dealing with digital identity in a safe way, in a way that everybody involved, both the enterprise and the employee, are safe and have confidence that they're actually doing the right thing. Even here at ForgeRock, where we are very aware of this, I would say about once a week or once every other week in the IT support room, there's a message saying, I got this email, should I respond to it? And it may just be HR saying, you've got to go in here and select your time off. But there's a real question that people are looking at that, and rightly so. They're looking at it and saying, should I trust this email? And for enterprises that haven't embraced that, this is a whole brave new world, right? This nothing about what they're having to do now is familiar, whereas those that have, although it's strange and although things are new, there's a lot of things that remain familiar to the ways that we've always done things. If you've always done two-factor authentication, having to do two-factor authentication now to prove who you are isn't a difference.
Yeah.
It's not strange.
Yeah. And so what are the biggest hindrances then for the companies that haven't been able to, create a good working environment for their employees? What is it usually that's holding them back from what you've seen?
Most of it is probably culture, right? And when I say culture, I mean both culture as well as policies built into the company. Anytime you have a business that is primarily driven by physical, whether it's physical location, physical space, physical devices, things like that, it's hard to move over to digital. It's hard to move into a virtual space, right? And so the interesting thing, I was having a discussion around this, around working from home, right? And prior to the pandemic, many people worked at home, but it was probably in the, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 25% of people that were, legitimately able to work at home on any kind of regular basis. Suddenly, starting in the beginning of March, if you could, you did. And we sort of shot up to 100% of possible workers doing that. I don't think it's ever going to go back to that 20% line, right? It'll probably go back a little bit. And yes, many of us, we're social creatures. We like going into the office and interacting. However, if we're given the option to work from home for 2 days or 3 days or 4 days a week, many of us will take that up. And I think that the adoption of flexible working, work from home, work from wherever, is probably going to fundamentally start shifting that, right? The enterprises that are going to survive are going to have to adapt to these digital kinds of things. It's been interesting. I sent my passport in to be renewed, and not with the hope of it happening anytime soon, but I'm not going anywhere anyway soon.
Yeah, sure.
But the reality is that I started thinking about the process. Imagine the process where you've got state government or federal government, the Department of State, that has to process these things. There's obviously very valuable personal information there. And I don't know how comfortable I feel with a Department of State employee driving around town with my passport in a box on his back seat, taking it home to work while his kids are doing homework on the floor. So, there's a really interesting challenge that we have to try and deal with when you're dealing with those kinds of things. And yet you go to their website and they are saying, please bear with us, it'll be a little slower, but we are working our way through the backlog and we are getting to this. And so there's a lot of, we have to sort of start moving slowly into this realization that digital interactions are going to become more and more the norm.
And so final question, I guess, for you then, for companies that weren't prepared at the start of the pandemic, who hadn't undergone digital transformation, is there hope for these companies? And what should they do, in your opinion?
There's always hope.
That's good.
I don't know. And the reality about it, and as sad as it is, there have been many businesses that have already, had to shut their doors. Even big ones, you look here in the US and we see stores like JCPenney that is having to shut it down because they can't, adapt to the new model. However, that being said, yes, a number of those businesses, this is the, as they say, the kick in the keister that basically says, look, you have to adopt this or die. And so the sort of thing that they have to look at, right, if you are not dealing with identity, if you are not taking a real hard look at how you deal with knowing who your employees are and who your customers are and how you interact with them in a purely digital medium, right, then you're lagging behind. And that needs to be something that you fundamentally have to look at. Everything else can be built on top of that. You don't need a portal. It's probably nice and you can get there. You know, all of these things can be added in. But if you don't know who you're dealing with, and if you can't trust who you're dealing with, then you can't even take the first step.
Yeah.
And so for those that haven't gone down the path, the sort of thing that I would actually recommend, right, start having a real honest discussion around digital identity and talk about how well are you doing? What do you need to do about this? And how is it, you know, how do you adapt it? If you have it, is it doing the job for you? Do you need to move to something more modern? Do the kinds of things that it's offering you actually solve the problems we're dealing with today? And, you know, make a real, honest, hard look at digital identity. Because on top of that, once you know who you're dealing with and you can trust who you're dealing with, you can start building all of these other things and you can build it up again.
Yeah. Well, Allan, I feel like you and I could talk about this for hours if we had the option, but that's
I
probably...
suppose I probably have to say the obligatory, you can call your ForgeRock account representative and have that discussion with them.
Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure. Maybe we'll have to get you back and we can continue the conversation. But Allan's absolutely right. If you want to talk to ForgeRock about any of this, the contact details are all on screen right now, and you can get in touch with us, and we'd be more than happy to chat through that with you. But Allan, it's been a real treat. It always is to chat with you, and I hope you stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.
And you as well. Thank you very much, Fraser. And for everybody watching, I hope you and your family stay safe and that we manage to get our way through this whole digital space.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next time. Bye.